writers of music, especially jazz, conduct their interviews, they usually ask about a musician's influences. They also get into the discography, the music they've played over the years. These questions relate to a musician's past, their history. This is not the way saxophonist, band leader, producer, and record label owner Jon Irabagon sees his life as a musician. For him, it's all about what's next. Hi, this is Steve Browngen, and you're listening to episode 11 of Strictly Jazz Sounds, your podcast of conversations about all things jazz. And man, on this episode, we do talk about all things jazz with one of the best jazz storytellers I've ever encountered, Jon Irabagon. Jon Irabagon's life story, which begins in Chicago, has a multitude of chapters containing many side roads that lead to vistas, valleys, rivers, and waysides. Strictly Jazz Sounds takes you on a tour of this saxophonist's elaborate life journey, and he's barely 45 years old. He's been to New York and back to Chicago, encountering many musicians and a lot of music in between. I asked Jon who his influences were. Hey, I'm a journalist. I wondered if he had reflected on what he had done over the past 25 plus years, and what were his thoughts about that. I bombed on that question, because Jon is a person whose gaze is set forward, not in the past. Jon is first-generation Filipino American and the father of 2 girls. Jon is influenced more by the individualistic philosophies and accomplishments of the Chicago-based organization, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, or AACM. These mixed complex-compositional ensembles, highly influenced by the works of John Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, and Albert Ayler, are the basis for Jon's work. But it's the future of this music that he seeks to play. The future of jazz, not the rehashing of the music of the past. And it's this future that he passes on to his students at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside and the University of Illinois-Chicago. And it seems that Jon is always ready to play music, especially with his close friends and colleagues, including trumpeter and Greenleaf Records owner Dave Douglas, whom he calls one of his heroes, or drummer Rudy Royston and pianist Luis Perdomo, or bassist Yasushi Nakamura, or instructor colleague trumpeter Russ Johnson, or baritone saxophonist Anders Savano, among many other musicians, all top-shelf talent, all who play challenging, intense jazz, some of it considered avant-garde. I would identify it as complex structures with ample room to improvise. This makes for finding labels that will publish these types of compositions customarily difficult. Jon removed this barrier by starting his own label, Irabbagast Records. He recorded not only his music, but also that of his friends. Jon spins remarkable tales of these musicians and their music, so many that I realized that after listening to our long conversation, 2 episodes could be done, and that's what I did. This is a 2-parter, or really a single episode with a bonus episode tucked inside it. The music tracks in episode 11, in the first part, include the following, and with the noted personnel. We're going to listen to Anchors from the album Outright. It's recorded on Innova Recordings in 2008. Jon Irabagon on alto sax, Russ Johnson on trumpet, Kris Davis on piano, Eivind Opsvik on bass, and Jeff Davis is on the drums. And then the second track is from the album Rising Sun, his latest recording on Irabbagast Records, recorded in 2022. We're going to listen to Mammoth. Jon Irabagon this time is on tenor sax, with Adam O'Farrell featured on trumpet. Matt Mitchell is on piano and Fender Rhodes. Kris Lightcap on electric bass, and Dan Weiss on the drums. I want to thank Jon Irabagon for all the music, and I want to ask you to please remember to subscribe if you have not already. So grab a beverage, a soft seat, and a quiet spot. This is episode 11 of Strictly Jazz Sounds. And when you're done with this one, subscribe if you haven't already. Then listen to the bonus episode complete with our music. Enjoy the conversation with Jon Irabagon, the sax player who's always looking forward. Here on Strictly Jazz Sounds, I'm Steve Browngen. how was your show at UW Parkside, your old digs?
Oh man, it was great. So I lived in New York for almost 20 years, and I'm originally from Chicago, and I moved back during the pandemic with my family. Get to see my parents a lot more, get to see my family a lot more. It's been great. So I've been teaching at UW Parkside, and Russ Johnson, who directs the jazz program over there, is a good friend of mine. He was on my first record back in 2008 called Outright, and I've been playing with him ever since. And he puts on this weekly jazz festival in the middle of March, and he was kind enough to invite my group, and it was great. We got to play my music to a really appreciative crowd. But then the really great part was there was about an hour after the set of question and answers with audience members and students that go to school there and other musicians that were there, and that's really the fun part, because just hearing how people interpret the music and what they think is going on, and getting to explain some of the ins and outs of group improvisation and things it's really, when we were able to see some faces light up, and those aha moments from the crowd, and especially from the students that go to school there, it was really great.
Share your experiences that you've had as a child with music, in particular. What music you listened to. How did you and when did you begin to listen to and enjoy jazz? What records were you exposed to? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, when I was a kid, a young kid, my parents they had some LPs and some 8 tracks and stuff, but they would listen to the radio a lot, and they would go through phases where they would listen to like country music for like 5 months or something, then elevator music for like 5 months, and then rock and roll and oldies for 5 months. And they would switch around a lot. And so I got used to hearing, the radio was on all the time, so I got used to hearing all these different styles, and it was all just great music to me. But by the time I got into high school, I was playing in the school jazz band just because my friends were in it and it was something fun to do. And I had a really great band director at Warren Township High School named Tom Beckwith, who's no longer with us, but he's really basically the person who put me on my path that I'm down today. So I have nothing but thanks and admiration to Tom Beckwith for giving me that. But he gave me a stack of CDs. There was Cannonball Adderley CDs. There was Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, Sonny Stitt, a lot of greats. And he's like, okay, this summer I need you to check these out because I want you to start playing in the jazz band. I want you to play lead alto in the top jazz band. And I honestly had no clue about that whole scene. I was listening to like Spyro Gyra and David Sanborn and Dave Koz and stuff at the time. So he set me on my path.
That's a change.
Yeah, and once I heard the Cannonball Adderley sound and articulation and soul, I was like, wait, you can do this with an instrument? This is possible to get that kind of like vocal expression out of a saxophone, and that set me on my path.
Beautiful sound, huh? Oh, that was a good way to do that too. That was a real good. From Spyro Gyra to Cannonball Adderley. Whew. That's a distance.
Yeah,
there, John.
so both with great alto saxophone sounds, but Cannonball really, I was like, wait, there's something to investigate here. How is he even doing that? And luckily I started taking lessons from Greg Fishman, who's a great educator, has a lot of great books out currently. And I was like, so what is going on here? And he really gave me the theory knowledge. He gave me the background of what was going on and the Great American Songbook stuff. And the tandem of Greg Fishman and Tom Beckwith really set me down my path.
Now that you're in your mid-40s, are you pausing from time to time to reflect on what you've done and how you've done it? What's your personal journey with that?
Well, not really. I've had a couple of really great mentors. I've been playing with Dave Douglas for a long time, and through him got to meet John Zorn and did some bagatelles of his last year and the last several years, but we recorded a record of his bagatelles with Chris Speed and Christian McBride and Chess Smith that's coming out in a couple months. So he's a great mentor to me, and like I've hung out with Roscoe Mitchell several times and played one of his pieces with orchestra in Prague last year. So I've had these mentors that they're not really about looking backwards. and they're proud of what they've done and everything. But it's always what's the next thing that's going to happen, and how can I build on, even if this record or this tour was a success, how can I build on that to keep moving forward and keep challenging myself and challenging the musicians that I play with, hopefully with positive and uplifting music and plenty of space for improvisation for everybody. So I don't really, every once in a while I'll think about what I've done and bands that are continuing from the past, but it's really about, okay, that was great and I'm really proud of that record or that time period, but what's the next step?
Yeah, I get the sense when I've listened to your music, and I've reached back into the early 2000s and to well, mid 2000s anyway. I don't have your very first album, which is really too bad, because I'm really interested in hearing how Russ and you got going at that time, because I do enjoy Russ's trumpet sound, and the difference between then and now is rather substantial.
Yeah. He's another one of those guys that it's like, okay, this has been great, but what's next, and how can I keep growing and changing?
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of musicians I'd love to associate with. I mean, that first record of mine from 2007 or 8 or something.
Yeah, it's 2007, I think. Yeah.
It's got Russ and it's got Kris Davis, who's doing great for herself these days, and Jeff Davis is a great drummer, and Eivind Opsvik, who's an incredible bass player, playing with Tim Byrne lately, and also doing a ton of mixing and mastering. And he mixed and mastered my most recent 2 records. So I'm still in touch with everybody from that record. And I wasn't actually even setting out to be a band leader or anything at that point. We were just doing weekly sessions for over a year. We'd get together at Kris's place every Wednesday or something and play, and we'd play standards, we'd play originals, we'd play completely free, and everything was just we were just searching for a lot of different things. And after a while, I'd bring in some tunes, I'd bring in more tunes, and after a while we had like a whole book of tunes for a whole record. And I was like, well, let's record this. I guess I'm a band leader now for a second.
This was in New York, right?
Yeah. Everyone was living in Brooklyn. I was living in Queens at the time, but I'd make the commute to Brooklyn and just try to play as much as I could with as many musicians that I admired.
No, that sounds like the right way to do it, because you need that work in order to gain all the experience of everybody else in order to move forward. It's, when I've listened to all your music, I feel one builds on top of the other. I'm hearing how one builds on top of the other. let me ask this question and tell me if this is not appropriate. As a Filipino American, what's your experience, especially touring, and especially in these times? What has been your experience?
Yeah, it's been varied. Let's say it that way. I've met a lot of Filipino younger musicians who who have come up to me after gigs or workshops or whatever, and they've been like, you know what, like, thank you, because I always loved music growing up and improvising, but I just never saw anyone that represented me, that looked like me. So thank you for being that person. So I'm very inspired by this next generation. There's several great young Filipino saxophone players that are going for it and finding their own voices, and I'm glad that we're slowly finding a place at the table, But it's been a it's been a tumultuous road. There have been definitely some incidences of just being shrugged off and discarded just strictly because I don't look like someone who could play jazz or who would have spent my time trying to learn this great music and trying to improvise. So, I mean, everyone's a minority in some way, shape, or form, whether they want to admit it or not. And sometimes that that thing can provide some roadblocks that you have to persevere above and just keep going past. I haven't focused on like traditional Filipino music much, or that aspect of my heritage much in my improvising or in my composition yet at this point in my career, and maybe at some point I will. But there's having been born here in Chicago, there's such a great tenor saxophone lineage just in Chicago alone, and the great American songbook and all this great American jazz that has happened. So thus far I've focused on that aspect, but I've been digging deeper and deeper into that part of my heritage, and who knows, maybe I'll feel like at some point there'll be something I could contribute to some aspect of Filipino music or something like that. But if I do that, I want to make it authentic, and I don't want it to be like, oh, here's my Filipino traditional folk music album just so I can like cross over or something. Like, I'd rather just dig deeper into where I'm coming from musically and see what happens with that.
Have you toured in the Philippines?
Yeah, I actually played at the Manila Jazz Festival in 2012, which was very interesting. It was cool because my parents and one of my uncles flew there with me, and we spent about a month there after the festival, and I got to meet a lot of my family I hadn't met before. I got to see a lot of my ancestral home locations, got to hang out on my mom's farm for about a week. So it was really great for me to connect with my family that I hadn't met before. It was interesting to meet the musicians there. It was great to play over there and just connect with all the wonderful people, and we did a lot of sightseeing too. It's just a beautiful country with beautiful people that have just been put into some unfortunate situations.
And there was an award that you received?
Yeah. One of my family friends nominated me for this Filipino presidential award, which I received a few years after that, which was great because it's just great knowing that some people out there are keeping track of my career and appreciating what I'm trying to do here.
That must feel good to have your culture celebrate you like that.
Yeah, like I definitely try to make music that's just that's just weird to the mainstream. Like this is just the stuff that I've decided I'm into and that I want to pursue. So I don't expect millions of followers on social media or anything like that. But if I can just keep doing my own thing and keep going that way, any support from any fans that appreciate challenging music or whatever is appreciated. So I'm just thankful for any fans out there, but it's really more about trying to pursue this music as an art form and just trying to find my own way within it.
Now that you are a label owner for was it more than 10 years now, Irabbagast Records. Have your expectations been fulfilled?
Well, I mean, I started the record label because I had some very interesting experiences with major labels and and not so major labels as I was developing. And as I still continue to develop, I wanted to cut out that part of the experience where some guy in an office somewhere is choosing pictures for me, choosing album names, and choosing track orders, and getting things that I've signed off on remixed and remastered. Things, just things like that. I wanted to have more control over all aspects of the music because it's really just, like everything is completely intertwined. So the artwork should match the vision of the album, like songs and things like that. So I just wanted to have more control over that kind of thing, and starting my own. And Dave Douglas is one of my good friends and mentors and band leaders that I work for, and he had started his own label maybe 20 years ago or something. So getting to pick his brain about that, it just seemed like the right. It's especially, I think I started it in 2012 or something like that. The climate starting back then just seemed correct to just jump in and do my own thing. And it's not to say that I won't put out some of my own stuff on other labels in the future. I'm trying to work on that too, because I don't want to get too narrow-minded or anything. But for the vast majority of my stuff, it's just seems to be a better fit to release my own things. And then as I started my own label and started putting out my own things, some of my friends who are having problems finding other labels to put things out, and I'm listening to their music and I'm saying, this is incredible stuff. It needs a home. Let's just put it out on mine. And hopefully years from now, people will be able to look back at Irabbagast Records and say, okay, this whole body, this whole catalog of 100 or 200 records or whatever it'll be, like every single one has some unique quality of the musicians really just trying to be themselves and not trying to compromise in any way, shape, or form.
Trying to meet some expectations of something or somebody in the market.
Exactly.
Because this is theirs. It's their art, and they are speaking their art.
Exactly. And we're all in it together. I don't have any magic button of getting, a million plays on Spotify or getting the cover of Downbeat or anything like that. But I don't think any of the musicians that I'm choosing to work with or myself that really put that much of an emphasis on that side of the music industry, because it's really more about the art and self-expression.
John, I don't know anybody who owns a record label. What's the process from beginning to end? How do you remain creative while running a business? But that process, I'm really curious. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, like the record label is really just a housing thing for my own. Originally my own records, so I didn't have to go through this process of sending it out to 100 labels every time and crossing my fingers and just waiting to hear what people were going to say. Like I just got tired of that, and I wanted just to have a consistent and specific place where I could just release my records. So like I don't really view it as, this isn't something that I'm dealing with every day and like spending vast amount of hours trying to like raise its profile or anything like that. That really doesn't interest me that much. For me, it's just the perfect place to like release record after record after record and just focus on the art and whatever's coming next, like I said earlier. So there are like certain steps, like you have to be a major part of, first of all, like making the music and picking the side people and then picking the studio and making sure it's well rehearsed and making sure to get some gigs in before the recording date, making sure the recording date goes well and that the piano's tuned and that all the musicians get fed and and make sure you treat them right and you pay them correctly, and then making sure to give a project some breathing room so that when I come back to it to pick the right takes, that I have a fresh set of ears. Because then maybe asking some of my friends to help be producer and pick the right takes. There's all that post-production stuff, picking the right people to mix and master and do the edits with you, and then figuring out the artwork and making sure the artwork doesn't have any typos or any, all this, just the basic stuff. And it's, each record has this post-production laborious process, which is not my favorite part. I'm the happiest when the project is rolling and we're doing gigs, and then we go into the studio and it's just magical, and like that's my favorite part. And then ideally there would have been somebody else to deal with all this post-production stuff, but that's just not how it works. So I get through it, and I have a database of, sometimes I use a publicist, sometimes I'll do it myself, and it's all just a project dependent and what kind of budget I have at the time, which most of the time is not much. And just trying to make do with what I can, because the most important thing is to document where these projects are or these people are at a certain point. And then, like I said, like my heroes like Roscoe Mitchell and John Zorn and Dave Douglas, like, okay, move on. What's the next thing, and how do we improve, and how do we stay in the moment? And that's really, the record label is just a continuous documentation of progress, hopefully.
So it's all about the music.
That's the point.
That's it. Let me ask this, and shift gears a little bit. I asked Stephanie Matthews and A Tribe for Jazz this question.
Okay.
Does jazz have an image problem?
Well, what did Stephanie say?
Oh, that would be cheating.
I mean, everyone's got their own angle, right? Like, if you ask a million jazz musicians if it has an image problem, you're going to get a million different answers. For me, I mean, it's almost unavoidable to not get on Instagram or Facebook or whatever the social media is of the day and check it out. And it's very difficult to not get sucked into that world. But I honestly don't really have that much of an interest in it. So I'll do what I can I'll do what I can bear doing to help a record get noticed or whatever, but it's really not the image aspect. I mean, I got into music because I love the sounds, and I love the art form that's based in real time and listening, and it's happening in time, where a painting is sitting right there and you can stare at it. In order to fully appreciate music, you have to be in the flow of it, and that's what attracted me to music more than any of the other art forms. So, like the image thing that's some business side, that's some industry side stuff that's for someone else to think about, I think. And for me, my job is to try to get as good as I can on the saxophone, try to be as honest as I can when I compose and when I improvise with fellow musicians, and let the rest of it take care of itself or not. I'm just trying to keep doing my own music.
When you spent time with A Tribe for Jazz here in Columbus, there clearly was a before and after look. Image, your image on social media, image on your records. Give examples of a before and after. What did you think changed for you when you worked with A Tribe for Jazz?
Okay, well, so Tribe for Jazz has been awesome. They reached out to me early in the pandemic, and they're like, we're trying to get our nonprofit off the ground, and we'd love to work with you and do some things. And I'm like, great, because I don't really think or care much about the visual side of it or presentation side of it or whatever. Like, so if someone's willing to help me out with that, that's awesome. And this is like right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I've always talked with my friends and they've poked fun at me that I could never grow facial hair because of whatever. So like I would always try or whatever, and it would just look terrible, and it would just come in all weird. And so at that same time, the Tribe for Jazz was reaching out to me saying like, oh, let's do something when things start opening up again. I was on this year-long quest to be like, okay, I'm not going to shave or anything or cut my hair or anything. First, because I didn't want to like go to the barber because we had no idea what was going on with that new virus. But also I was like, well, this is my chance. I got to take this chance and just see. Let me just let this thing grow out and see what happens. And so simultaneously to them being like, okay, we're going to like hire photographers and get this image thing going for you. I was changing my look just because I was daring myself to see how long I could go without shaving or cutting my hair or whatever. So it was all happening simultaneously. But then like people like Stephanie and they there's a great stylist that they use named Sierra Swingle, who's been amazing, and she's a great friend of mine, and she's helped me out a lot picking out different outfits that make me feel comfortable in my own skin but still look really cool. So I'm appreciative for all that. That's their job, and I'm happy for any help that they're going to give me and everything. But I'm still focusing on the music, and all the other stuff is just kind of on the side.
I told Stephanie that I agreed with her that you looked fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
So they did a good job.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. They're wonderful people, and I'm so glad to see that they're starting to help out more and more jazz musicians. Because like I think most jazz musicians think like me that okay, well, just trying to work on the art form is itself 2 full-time jobs. So how much time and energy do I even have if I have a family, if I've got kids, if I've got elderly parents or anything? How much time or energy do I even have to focus on this whole thing that's a whole nother career? Like being a social media butterfly or influencer or whatever the buzzword is these days. Like most jazz musicians don't even have the time or energy to spend on that stuff. So having nonprofits like Tribe for Jazz and anyone else that's out there that's trying to help, like I've been fortunate enough to do some Jazz Roads South Arts tours, and they're a great organization from the South that has this money, and they're helping jazz musicians tour within the United States.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing, and like jazz musicians are so enterprising, but they're so focused on the music and the art form, which they should be.
They should
so any
be.
nonprofit any nonprofit that's willing to help is a godsend for any real musicians out there.
That's a good way to put it. You're a parent. You have 2 children.
Yeah, 2 girls.
2 girls. How old are they?
I'm in the thick of it. They are 4 and 1.5.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I do too sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, we have 2 children, and we have 1 grandchild that's here in Columbus, and that's why we're here. When you're a parent, I don't know how you do it because sleep is what you need the most. How does that work for you when you're traveling, when you're doing gigs, when you're teaching, you're recording, you're writing, doing podcast interviews? How are you managing all of this, John?
Just barely. You gotta follow the muse when you've got time. It definitely don't have as much practice time as I used to, but when I actually do get to go into my space and work, it's way more efficient now. I have to know what my goals are and what's coming up. If I have to write a whole album's worth of music, it's like, okay, I got to spend my time on that. I got to catch up on emails. It's all of it's just all the time is really shrunken down, and you just have to be as efficient as you can. And sometimes you just feel like you're behind. And whereas touring used to be, oh, I've never been to this town before, let me check out the sites and stuff more times than not. It's like, okay, well, I've got to catch up on these emails or these projects or these compositions, or I've got to catch up on some sleep or something. So it's really just, it's one gigantic Tetris puzzle and trying to put it together somehow, day in and day out.
That's a great way to put it, the Tetris. I like that. Now, you're at UW-Parkside.
I do teach there, yeah. I teach the saxophone students there. Yeah, I also started at the University of Illinois at Chicago just this past semester, and I'm teaching some saxophone students there. I run a small group, and I teach an online jazz history course.
What do you see in young musicians today? And I had a conversation with Emmanuel Wilkins last week, and we talked about what we called a current renaissance. And I mean, there's just seems to be this bubbling up of young musicians between 18 and 30 32 years old. I mean, it seems to me anyway that there is a real bubble that's coming up.
Yeah.
Am I wrong in that?
No, you're totally right. I mean, in some ways, like, despite the completely ludicrous idea of trying to make a living being a jazz musician in 2023 with no, with the Spotify, like the way that you get not paid for streams and the difficulty of the touring market and the economy and everything like that. Even with that, I mean, true art finds a way in all circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And times are really tough right now, but there is a renaissance of young musicians who have internalized the lessons of Wynton and loving and studying the tradition, and they've also internalized the lessons of John Zorn, where it's like an iPod thing where you should be able to recall any type of musical genre within seconds of each other. And that transition that started more than 30 years ago, like, is now finally, with this current generation of musicians coming up, is starting to just be the most natural thing to them. And what's beautiful is some of my students, like, so when I was growing up, listening to the early Charlie Parker recordings, or like especially like the Louis Armstrong recordings that we all know and love, it took me a long time to get over the sound quality of those early recordings. And I'm like, okay, well, I know there's really good music behind this noise floor and everything like that, but I have to get through it. Okay, let me listen to it 1,000 times so I get used to the sound, and then I can get to the music. And what's interesting is, like, this generation's worth of musicians are listening to this compressed music through MP3s anyways, so they're used to like a lower sound quality, and so it's actually easier for them to get into the Louis Armstrong stuff, the lo-fi early jazz recordings, because they're used to the sound not being so perfect. And so I've got these amazing students that are coming to me, like, they're able to dig into the hot fives and hot sevens immediately because they're just like, oh yeah, the sound is fine, whatever. And I know for me and a lot of people from my generation, we had to work through that. We were just used to CDs and, like, quote unquote pristine sound. And so in some ways, this younger generation of musicians are lucky, because not only do they have their every single recording at their fingertips any time of the day, without leaving their house, but they also have this ability to, like, shift in and out of, like, low and hi-fi sound and just deal with it as the music. So there's a lot of potential coming up, and there's a lot of great musicians, and, like, I'm excited to see where they can take this music.
Students who have had to do the instruction over the internet, over Zoom, during the lockdown days of the pandemic.
Yeah.
What challenges did these students have that you discovered? How did you use the music to reach them during those really tough days?
Yeah, I mean, online lessons are better than nothing, but they're not ideal in any way, shape, or form. They're not. You don't get to interact musically because of the time delay. You don't get that energy of being face to face or in person. But I mean, it was unprecedented times, and luckily, technology allowed teachers and students to still interact and students to grow. I mean, it was a difficult time for everyone, but I'm amazed with the younger generation's ability to just deal with technology and the way that they can use Logic or Ableton and get their musical ideas out there and combine technology with improvising and extended techniques and everything. I've seen numerous students, like several of my students, have just come up with fascinating projects that I hope they follow through with. So there's a lot of potential, and I think like a true artist is going to take whatever they've been given and persevere past it, and hopefully come up with something their own and something new.
Let's talk a little bit about your music. You have I Don't Hear Nothing But the Blues in 3 volumes.
Right.
And they're all extended compositions, over 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
How did you prepare for such an intense and challenging recording. How did all of you? How did the whole band prepare for that?
Yeah, I think, well, for myself, I know that at a certain point, I was going through like a deep Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane phase, and I would find bootlegs and they would take solos for 45, 50 minutes nonstop. And so I'm like, okay, so that's been the standard. The physicality of it is the standard that has been set by the greats. And so not that like some sort of masculine, like, ah, raw, I'm going to play nonstop and really loud or something. That's not the driving force behind it. But some of my heroes have set this bar really high for the physicality of improvising. And that's one aspect of it. So at the time, which this band started, I Don't Hear Nothing But the Blues started in 2010 or something. And so I wanted to like see if I could do it. I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could be creative for that amount of time. So it's a matter of keeping my brain and my heart and and my whole body going continuously. Nothing But the Blues started out with just Mike Pride and I as a duo, and I had gotten this idea from Sonny Rollins, and I interviewed Rollins, and he told me I was completely wrong in my interpretation. So he laughed in my face, which was disheartening for a second, but then I'm like, wait a sec, there's a possibility here. So what happened was I transcribed one of Sonny's solos, and I swear that every chorus, when we got to the exact same bar in whatever chorus, in whatever bar that was, in every chorus, he played the exact same idea for several choruses in a row from the first chorus. So I said, there's no way when the rest of the solo is growing in this special Sonny Rollins way that this one bar would keep happening verbatim. I'm like, there's something going on there. So I'm thinking about it night after night. I'm trying to play along with the solo, trying to learn what I can from it. And I'm like, okay, he must have allowed his brain to grow, but remembered that in that bar, I'm going to play whatever that lick was that I played in the first chorus. So then I tried to do it on a gig, and I couldn't. I got lost. I couldn't do it. I forgot what the lick was a couple choruses in, so I just completely folded. So I'm like, okay, well, this is something I should practice. There's something about this that interests me, so let me practice this. So it took me like a year of practicing before I could actually like break it out on a live performance at any point. So then I'd been playing with Mike. We've been doing some free improv duo sessions at his house. And I'm like, okay, let me see if I can, whatever idea I start with, let me see if I can grow that idea and then still recall the original idea. So now I'm toggling between two ideas. And let me grow that second idea to a third idea. And then let me grow the original idea into a different fourth idea. Let me see if I can toggle those four ideas as they are. And then let me grow those four ideas into four other ones. Now I've got 8, and let me see if I can toggle back and forth between. So like the whole idea was for the original I Don't Hear Nothing But the Blues came from this like misinterpreted Rollins solo that I transcribed.
Oh, I love it.
And asked him about. And so every volume of Nothing But the Blues, I've been wanting to add a new musician where they're free to do whatever they want, but I'm more or less sticking with this this kind of additive growth kind of thing for myself. But I'm not forcing anyone else to do it.
So you anchor it basically with what you're going to do and have them build on it.
Yeah, and like, it's been 10 years and my ideas of what those ideas are and what to toggle have changed a lot. So each volume's completely different. We just recorded volume 3, part 2, because it's still the quartet with Mick Barr and Ava Mendoza and Mike Pride. We had a performance coming up, and I didn't want to, I really love this quartet formation, so I didn't want to add anybody else. So we're going to call it volume 3, part 2. And it's incredible because it's completely different music than any of the first 3 settings. And we're just going to keep growing it.
That's great. That's great. Well, you move forward. That's what you do. You just keep moving. And I get that sense with the volumes of music that you have. I really feel this movement happening. During the pandemic, and I was reading the liner notes of Rising Sun.
Oh, yeah.
And then Bird with Streams. And during this time, of the pandemic, obviously, so many of us were trying to find places to be. And you obviously escaped out to the West, South Dakota. Your wife's family is out there.
Yeah. Yeah, they
And
were living in Rapid City, South Dakota, so really close to Mount Rushmore.
yeah, it's a
When
beautiful area.
oh, it's incredible. And when New York shut down in March 2020, we just immediately flew out there, and we were just hoping and praying that we weren't going to be like patient zero and bringing COVID on our luggage to South Dakota, which had none at the time. So luckily we weren't, and we were planning on staying out there for 2 weeks, and we wound up being out there for 8 months. But while I was out there, I found this canyon. There was like a 5-minute drive from my in-laws' house, and they were gracious enough to let me go practice there every day for like 4 or 5 hours. And it was not much positive came out of the pandemic, but that was a life-changingly positive thing for me to get to practice for 4 hours a day, every day, with no agenda, because there were no gigs, there was no recording sessions, there was nothing to prepare for. And a professional musician just gets, lots of times if they don't watch out, can get put on this hamster wheel of just making sure you're ready for the next gig and preparing for that thing, instead of, okay, well, what do I actually want to say with music and stuff? And so those 6 or 7 months practicing out in this canyon every day was a complete life-changing experience for me. It was beautiful, and I had to document it somehow. So the last couple of weeks I was out there, I conceived of the Charlie Parker tribute record, solo tenor record, Bird with Streams, and did that. And that whole time I was recording myself improvising, and I came up with these snippets that wound up becoming the songs on Rising Sun.
So the Canyons was your bridge as it was for Sonny Rollins.
Yeah, it's funny. Like several people had told me that when Bird with Streams came out, because I was doing some interviews for that, and people were saying, "Well, that's obviously the bridge." And you know what? Until that point, it hadn't even occurred to me
Really?
that it was some kind of equivalence. No,
No kidding.
It never crossed my mind. And now that people said it, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. But for me, the circumstances were just terrible, and I found something and made it work. And now in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, well, if that was my bridge period, I would love to have another 8 months to get to do that and be even more focused and thankful for it.
I had who was I talking to? Actually, it was Sonny. When I talked to Sonny, and he was talking about Ornette Coleman taking him out to the ocean and when he was out in L.A. and he going out to the ocean, even in the same way that Ornette would do it, Eric Dolphy would do it, using nature as that whole encompassing element, so that you would respond to nature and feel what nature would do for your music, for you personally.
For me, it was incredible. I just, throwing sounds out the canyon walls, interacting with the deer that were there, the birds. There was this one bee that just kept messing with me the entire summer. I'm positive it was one bee. I'm positive. So trying to yell at him through my saxophone. It was incredible. It was incredible, and I would love to get to do it again. And I would do different things. I'd bring different saxophones with me. I would prepare differently. It was incredible. I wouldn't trade that time for the world. And I was supposed to do a ton of touring in 2020, but because I couldn't, because of the pandemic, I'd come home from that practice time and spend the entire time with my 1-year-old, and it was incredible. I wouldn't trade that time, even though it was a tragedy for the most part.
Well, this is not the end of the full episode. Jon Irabagon has more stories to tell, especially the first one on the bonus episode. Find out about the album Blue, which is a total recreation of the Miles Davis classic Kind of Blue. And it's by the group Mostly Other People Do the Killing. Yes, there is a group by that name. Then there are a few more tales of a few more recordings by a few more musicians. Before I close out this part of episode 11, thanks so much to Jon Irabagon for all the music. Thanks to A Tribe for Jazz for helping to make connections. Johannes Wallman wrote the music. That's the theme song McCoy from his album Precarious Towers. Remember to subscribe. You'll automatically receive future episodes when I publish them. If you'd like to be a sponsor, please email me through my website. Strictly Jazz Sounds has a Facebook page, and I have a Facebook group called Jazz Enthusiasts. If you want to join the group, please send a request in Facebook. You can leave a review of this show on the SJS website. I can only improve. And support live jazz wherever you are. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve Browngen. Saxophonist Jon Irabagon and I spent well over an hour in conversation, so there is a bonus episode, complete with 2 tracks of music. The first story in this bonus episode is a suspenseful one. It has the tension of a story about internet rage over an album that Jon Irabagon and the first band he recorded with did. That was a recreation of the best-selling album in jazz history, and I'm going to leave that up to you to figure it out. The name of the band is not your ordinary or even a little extraordinary name. It is called Most Other People Do the Killing. Jon shares how the name was acquired and who led it. Then we talk about John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley. I tell you, Jon Irabagon is a master of transcribing the most challenging music. Hear what he does and what he expects his students to do with some of the toughest music recorded. And we have 2 more tracks from Jon Irabagon's label, Irabbagast Records, a treat I appreciate so much. What we're going to listen to is The Cost of Modern Living from the album Behind the Sky. That was recorded in 2015. Features Jon on tenor and soprano saxophone on other parts of this album. Luis Perdomo is on piano, Yasushi Nakamura on bass, and Rudy Royston is on drums. And we're going to hear mostly the same band, except Tim Hagans is on trumpet on this next cut, and it's from the album Dr. Quixotic's Traveling Exotics. Check that out. Dr. Quixotic's Traveling Exotics. The Bonus Monster is what we're going to listen to. This was recorded in 2018. If you have not listened to the first part of episode 11, go do it now. Then come back to this bonus track. Remember to subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. This is Steve Browngan, and you're listening to Strictly Jazz Sounds. Blue. I want to talk about Blue. Who is in that band, and how in the hell did you guys come up with that name? I'd like to know that one first.
Okay, so the band was put together by the bass player named Mappa Elliott. And when him and I both moved to New York in like the fall of 2001. And we met through mutual friends and started playing and saw that we both loved the same things about jazz and thought certain things were funny. And I just had similar senses of humor and like taste in music. And he went to Oberlin, and he knew Peter Evans, the trumpet player from Oberlin. And when Peter moved to New York a few years after that, Mappa knew that he wanted Peter to play in the band. And then originally, the band had a great drummer named Vinny Sperazza, who plays a lot these days. He plays with Michael Formanek, and he plays with Ethan Iverson, and he's a great encyclopedia of knowledge on jazz. And he was the original drummer, but he kept having to sub out of the original gigs because he was such an in-demand drummer already. And so we got Kevin Shea to sub for him and eventually just be in the band. So for a while, for maybe 10 years or something of that band's existence, it was a chordless quartet of saxophone, trumpet, bass, and drums. And during those years, we started touring Europe a lot. We started doing van tours across America, and we were playing a lot, growing this body of music, and really getting to be ourselves, playing music and improvising with changing parameters and pulling the rug out from each other on purpose, and just being cool with challenging ourselves every night. And hopefully each night the music did something completely different, and it was a great learning experience with some really close friends. And so during these tours, Mappa came up with the idea of like, oh, let's do a whole record note for note, because it's really a thought experiment about the whole what is jazz, and is it just swing that's needed for jazz, or does improvising need to be happening in jazz? And also like the classical music thing, like there's different versions of each tune. How come there can't be different versions of each performance, blah, blah, blah. So it was a big mental thought experiment. And the band had done 7 or 8 records already at that point. And so we were like, wow, are we So then we were like, okay, well, which record should it be? And unanimously, it'd be like, well, it would be Kind of Blue, because that's the most famous and biggest selling jazz record of all time. So that would be the one. Are we really going to commit to doing this? Because this is going to be the most amount of work that any of us have ever done for anything for the least amount of payoff. Because you're never going to be happy with what it is. You're never going to get as good as Cannonball, no matter how many hours you try to put in, because you're just not Cannonball. So are we really going to do this? And like, are we the only 4 people that are crazy enough to agree to do this? And like, yeah, let's do it. Like this band has been through a lot, and we've tried a lot of original things, and this is another original thing in a way to try to, like, as a band, do this. And so there's piano on the record, obviously, Wynton Kelly and Bill Evans, and so our good friend Ron Stabinsky came in and came on board to record those parts. And so it was, like I said, it was a lot of work, and there's certain ones of the solos I'm like, well, that's as close as I'll ever get. And then certain of them, I'm like, well, that's obviously not Coltrane, and so I would love to try that again, but what would be the point of trying it again? So it was a fascinating experience. I was really surprised that it got any attention at all, being that, I mean, how much attention did the previous 8 records get from that band? So it would just happen to come out in the perfect age of internet outrage, and like people needing to be on social media, needing to make a stand for something and be mad about something. And it was funny, when that album came out, I was actually on vacation in like the Dominican Republic or something, and I didn't check my phone for like a week. And when we touched down at LaGuardia or whatever, I like turn on the power on the phone. I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm sure I'm gonna have a couple hundred emails to catch up on. And the amount of text messages and emails I had were just, and Facebook messages were just insane. And I had no idea what was going on. So like about a week later, I was like caught up on everything. Like, wow, cool to be a person that's involved with internet outrage. Everyone should be the victim of internet outrage at some point, because then maybe people would stop throwing around just dumbass internet outrage.
How many emails and text messages did you get?
Hundreds.
I mean, did you?
Hundreds.
You got hundreds.
Hundreds. Hate mail, death threats, support. Some support, like, cool, like, I don't know why you would do that, but congratulations, like, and then just like, oh, I love the idea behind it and what it stands for. The entire gamut. And whatever, like I said, I'm focused on making whatever the philosophy of the record is, and trying to make that as best as I can. And then the post-production and all the stuff that happens afterwards, and people's feelings about Rising Sun or Birds with Streams or Blue, like, that's great. Whatever. Whatever your reaction is the correct reaction. And like, I don't really care that much about it. So to get hundreds of emails and texts, some supportive and some really damning, that's great, because that's part of what the record was about, right? Like, it was meant to start a conversation. I just couldn't believe that, some of they should do their own music. And it's like, well, yeah, the band started out for a decade of doing 8 of our own records of originals, and no one gave a shit about those records. So to care that much about Blue, like, that was just very interesting to me, and said a lot more about the people who are internet outraging than the actual project itself. And what's interesting is that even just maybe like that, so that record came out, what, 2014 or 15 or something like that. Even just recently, like a couple months ago, one of the biggest detractors of that record, who it really hit close to home for that person, because he's made his whole career on tribute records to his former bosses or whatever. Even just like a year ago, he made some Facebook post about Blue. And it's like, wow, this record really, it's really hurting that person in some, it's really exposing that person to himself in some way, shape, and form. So, I mean, I had no idea that could be possible from doing this, but it was apparently.
The Wall Street Journal said that it would spawn verbatim versions of other classic jazz albums. Did you guys have that kind of an impact?
I mean, has there been anything else? No. But also, it's really hard to do. And no one wants to put that kind of effort into that. They should be doing their own music. So I get that too. Someone suggested while the Internet Outrage machine was flying around in the weeks after that, they were like, well, we should take one of most of the other people do the Killings records and do that note for note. And I was like, that would be amazing. That would be hilarious. And I would buy that. So someone do it. But people they don't put their money where their mouth is, and they just gave up on it. So, I mean, I still get people that come up to me saying that like it was an amazing statement, and then I still have people behind my back talking smack about the record, and both are totally cool.
Well, you've moved on like you usually do. You move on.
Yeah, it was really just one. It was just one drop in the bucket for that band, and that band was ending that formation of that band at that time, anyways. Peter was taken. I mean, Peter had already taken off, and he was a shooting star, and so in demand that he couldn't bring his own albums and tour his own records if most of the other people was still playing a lot. So the band formation was already in flux at that time. So it just so happened that we finished Blue, and then the band personnel started changing. So that was completely unrelated to anything. But I'm really glad that we saw Blue to its conclusion, and I'm also happy to have been one of the victims of internet outrage. It's great. Everyone should do that.
Everyone should. That's okay. Well, let me ask this though: did stepping into John Coltrane's and Cannonball Adderley's shoes give you insight into how they approach creative improvisation? I understand that you've transcribed all of Coltrane's solos.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big transcription person, and I actually always make my students who are into jazz transcribe like a lot. And I know there's different forms of thought on that, or versions of thought on that, and like I appreciate all the other ones too. But for me, just starting from nothing and getting that stack of Cannonball Adderley records and being like, okay, what is this? Let me figure it out. Like, and that jump starting my creative process, for me, that's invaluable. So that's just what has worked for me, and so I'm just going to encourage my students to transcribe a lot. At a certain point, I got really obsessed with Coltrane, and I was like, well, how does the same musician get from the Army Band in 1947 or whatever to 20 years later doing Interstellar Space? Like, how is that the same musician?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to find the building blocks of all his vocabulary, because I'm like, well, he recorded so much that so much is documented. Maybe there are these little breadcrumbs that I can follow along to see the progress that Coltrane made throughout his career. And so for about a decade, I was just obsessed with solo after solo after solo. And I didn't do every single solo, because some of them I was like, okay, well, this one didn't quite hit the mark for me, so I'm going to move on. But I did do several hundred, like many hundreds of solos, and it took 10 years. And like, that was time spent that I could have been doing other things, but I was really obsessed at the time with like, okay, well, how did he add this? How did the false fingerings get added? How did the overtone stuff get added? Where does the multiphonics come in? Where do these lines come in? And at a certain point, a few years ago, I was able to like see the progression from all the work that I had done. And you're not going to get that from like buying Andrew White's set of transcriptions of Coltrane solos. So he already did all of them. So it wasn't about that. It was just about my own pursuit and my own journey and finding what I could.
Every musician knows that what you listen to, and even what you try to, you transcribe, that finds its way into your own work. How much of what you've done with both Cannonball and Coltrane, how much of that has flowed into your work?
Oh, a lot. It's inescapable at first. If you're trying to emulate a master, it's going to try a certain percentage of it is going to seep into your playing, and obviously you're not going to get all of it. You're never going to sound as good as Coltrane or Cannonball, because only them are them, or whatever. But I went through a period, because I originally started playing alto, and when Dave Douglas asked me to be in his newly formed quintet back in 2012 or 13, he only wanted tenor. And so I had been playing tenor a little bit because in Chicago, where I was growing up, like Chicago has such a great tenor lineage.
Oh, yeah.
That you had to play a little bit of tenor if you wanted to do some work. So I was playing tenor, but mostly alto at the time. And when Dave asked me, I was like, yeah, totally. Dave was one of my heroes. So to get to perform with him on a regular basis, that was a dream come true for me. And so I was like, man, I got to really get my tenor thing together. And what I realized was I had a lot of jazz lineage holes in my playing. And I hadn't checked out a lot of the tenor masters to a real degree where I could say that I really had. So I went through several years of obsessive transcribing and trying to inhabit the shoes of some of my tenor heroes. And so ideally, at a certain point, all that integration and study will just be part of my playing, and I'll find my own personal voice through them and not just them. And that pursuit is ongoing, and it's always going to be, and that's what being a professional jazz musician is trying to find yourself through the history and the respect and love for the history, but also trying to put your own stamp on it.
Yeah.
So.
Do you continue to consider Dr. Quixotic's Traveling Exotics that features Tom Hagans? Do you still consider that as your best work?
Well, I really love that record. I mean, I love all my records. They're all my little.
I do too. I really enjoy that record, but I also really got into Rising Sun a whole lot.
Yeah, and so those are two totally different bands. I love keeping bands together for a long amount of time, and I still play with Rudy and Yasushi and Luis, but that record was really special to make the Dr. Quixotic's Traveling Exotics record. I'm really proud of the compositions on there and what those guys were able to accomplish with those intricate labyrinth tunes. And so Rising Sun is they're very similar records in a certain way, in that each of the songs have several different parts. I don't care at all about radio play and being concise. I want each piece, the suite of each piece, to unfold in its own time, and if it's too long to play on the radio, that's totally fine. But Rising Sun was with my new quartet with Dan Weiss and Kris Lightcap and Matt Mitchell, all of whom I've played with for years, and the three of them as a rhythm section just gel and bring a completely different thing to the music. So I'm very excited about that record as well. Each of my records I'm very happy with when they come out, and then I never listen to them again, and then move on. And so what I recall about Dr. Quixotics and what I recall about Rising Sun, I'm super proud of. But this quartet with Dan and Kris and Matt, we've been on the road several times. There's a quartet record in the can where I play alto, which I haven't done for 10 years, where I play exclusively alto. And so that record's coming out at some point next year. There's a record coming out in a few months this year that's Dan and Kris and Matt, along with Ray Anderson playing trombone. So it's a quintet record. And actually, because it's quintet, it's actually going to be the new Outright record. So it's going to complete the original Outright trilogy, which started as my first record. And then we put out a record when I started my record label back in 2012 or 2013. And then this next Outright record, which is coming out later this year, is like finishing the original conceived trilogy of the Outright trilogy. So that's got Dan and Kris and Matt and Ray Anderson on trombone.
I really, really like Rudy Royston a lot. Yeah. I think that he's not as appreciated as other drummers. He consistently demonstrates brilliance and creativity in all his work.
Now, he's one of my favorite musicians and one of my favorite people. He's got great heart, and you can hear
That's great.
You can hear it in his playing. He had a trio with myself and Yasushi Nakamura, and we put out a record on Greenleaf called Rise of Orion, and it's still one of my favorite projects I've been a part of, because he wants everyone to expand on things. He wanted us to take chances, and he provided such a solid foundation for it, and wrote amazing tunes and found perfect covers for this wide array of expression. And I keep, every time, we just did a Dave Douglas quintet tour in Europe in January, and every day I was bugging him. I'm like, man, when are you going to write more Rise of Orion tunes? Because that trio was one of my favorite things to be a part of. So hopefully I'm going to keep prodding him enough to guilt him into doing another trio record.
Well, that's good. You should do that.
Yeah.
Stay on top of that.
Yeah.
And Sushi is all over the place. I mean, Sushi is one of the most in demand bassists I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yasushi is one of the most incredible and most just relaxed people. But when you get on the bandstand, he's ferocious. He's
ferocious.
On tour with the Monterey All Stars now, I think. If I remember correctly.
I'm going to be seeing him, as a matter of fact.
Great. I mean, and he just loves flying below the radar, but you can't really ask for much more than what he brings
fierce.
to the table. So.
Now, I am not familiar with Sylvain Riflet.
Yeah.
Tell me about him.
So Sylvain and I have been friends since 1998. So Sylvain is a great tenor saxophonist and clarinetist based out of Paris. And Sylvain and I met in 1998 because we both did the Disneyland Collegiate All-Star Band.
You did.
Yeah. So I was like a junior in college or a sophomore in college, or so. I was a sophomore in college, and Sylvain had just finished at the Conservatory of Music in Paris, like the famous, like highest level conservatory in Paris. So he wanted a summer abroad, and I wanted a summer in the perfect weather of Southern California, and we both did this Disney band where we were working six days a week, playing 7 shows a day, marching around the park in perfect weather. And Sylvain and I, along with a couple other musicians from there, hit it off brilliantly, and we've been really great friends ever since. Our whole families are friends. We went on vacation to like southern rural France with Sylvain and his family last summer, and we're like the best of friends. And I admire his musicality and his risk-taking and his projects in France. And he's been a big inspiration for me in that regard too. And in 1998, when I was just an undergrad, he was like, okay, you should listen to this record, this record, this record, this record. And these records from Europe are like the main new thing that's happening for us. And so I learned a lot musically from him even back then. And I still bounce ideas off of him, and I still look up to him musically. And so over the years, we've won a couple of grants to do some French-American cultural exchange projects. So we did this project on arranging the music of Moondog, who we both love and admire his compositions. So we arranged Moondog's music, and then more recently, we put together a double saxophone, bass, drums quartet with Sébastien Boisard from France and Jim Black, called Rebellions. And so both Sylvain and I found speeches, recordings, and text of a lot of like cultural visionaries, trying for women's suffrage and gun control and just general rights and common sense equality topics. And so we wrote original compositions to these speeches and tried to find new and interesting ways to improvise around the speeches and focus on the speeches sometimes, but have them in the backgrounds other times, and just try to create a whole album's worth of like original music interacting with different civic speeches that we thought were important for the day.
And that's what Rebellions is all about, right?
Yeah. So our album Rebellions, which is out on BMC, which is the Budapest Music Center. The BMC hosted us for a couple different weeks of workshops and gigs, and then eventually a recording, which we're very proud of. And so we're trying to keep Rebellions on the road, trying to tour it. We toured it several times last year, trying to do it again this summer, and we'll see if another record will present itself.
I thought Rebellions was a great recording. That really piqued my interest. And the other one that Sylvain Riflet did was Perpetual Motion. What's that about? That's
the Moondog.
That's the Moondog one. Okay.
That's the Moondog record that we prepared in Paris, debuted out there, and then did a recording and a live DVD for.
Now, the production work that you've done with Anders Savano, who else have you worked with as a producer versus a musician? You know, you've done the sideman on horn, and with Anders, you've produced all of his Irabbagast label music.
Yeah. Anders is a great friend of mine. We worked together when I was living in Chicago before I moved to New York. We did a couple concerts and double bills and things together. I've always admired his tenacity and like the way he's just dedicated to the baritone and can get and is interested in so many different styles and directions for it. And I think there have been a million great alto players and a million great tenor players and maybe like a 500,000 really good soprano players, but baritone out of the 4 main saxophones is definitely the one that's been least mined. So I keep trying to encourage Anders to figure out different avenues for the horn because he makes it sing so well. My good friend Josh Sinton is a great and renowned baritone player, but he also plays contrabass clarinet. And he has a very special project where he puts the contrabass clarinet through an amplifier and has created completely unique sound worlds with that. And so I encouraged him to put out a record on my label of just amplified contrabass clarinet. And so that's called Krasa, and it's really great. And I'm super proud of that record for him. And so I didn't have anything musically to do with that, but I encouraged him to do it. And so that's another example on my label. And there's a new record that Chicago bassist Clark Summers recorded during the pandemic. It's a 12-tet, and it's really beautiful music that he really hunkered down and wrote during the early part of the pandemic. And so that's going to come out on my label later this year too, that I didn't really have anything to do with musically.
Well, way to go.
So I'm trying to do a lot of other things, but you know, again, first and foremost, I'm interested in creative music and my own, and trying to put out different solo records and different quartet records. And I've got a 10-tet record that's coming out next year at some point. So I'm trying to do a lot of different things, but I'm also trying to help my friends who are sticking to and being uncompromising with their visions. And if they need a boost or just a home for their albums, I'm happy to provide that.
Now, you have a slide sax and a soprano sax. Man, that slide sax. What are you doing with that? Are you just playing with it, or are you ready to record with that?
You know, I did a duo album with Ivo Perlman. He put out a 12 CD box set this year called Reed Rapture in Brooklyn, I think. I think it's called Reed Rapture. And each CD is a duo of Ivo with a different saxophonist playing a different saxophone. So Lovano's on there playing mezzo-soprano, saxophone, and tenor. I think James Carter plays Barry on it. Dave Liebman plays soprano, I think. So every record has a different duo partner for Ivo. I'm on one of them, and I play sopranino and slide saxophone with Ivo playing tenor.
So you have both of them, okay.
So I play both of them for Ivo's record, and like I switch back and forth. And the slide saxophone is really evil. It's really hard to get anything going because you don't. It's just awkward. It's not a very friendly instrument. I love it. And it's very challenging, and I'm trying to do a solo saxophone record on all the saxophones eventually. So eventually there's going to be a slide saxophone one, but I have to figure out, that's going to be a couple of years trying to figure out what that thing can even do and what that thing can even say. but I've done, my very first solo saxophone record was the Sopranino record, which I spent more than a year working towards because I was so intimidated, not only by the instrument, but also just trying to make a solo saxophone record. There's been so many great ones that I'm like, what am I going to contribute to this? So yeah, I forced myself to spend a year. I made that record. I'm very proud of it. It's called Inaction is an Action. And then around that time, I bought a mezzo-soprano saxophone, got fascinated with the sound quality of that instrument. So I put out a double record called Invisible Horizon. And one of the CDs of that double record is a solo mezzo-soprano album that I recorded in a mausoleum in Norway with incredible reverb.
That must have been an absolutely incredible place.
Oh, it was incredible. It was mind-altering getting to do stuff there. And then, you know, the solo tenor Bird with Streams record in the Canyon was one I hadn't intended to make, but opportunity presented itself. And then I have a solo Soprillo record that's in the can that I'm like editing and mixing right now. So that's going to come out hopefully later this year, along with the new Outright record with Ray Anderson.
Well, there you go. You're the man. You are moving forward.
Trying to change it up, trying to challenge myself, and never be too comfortable.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of episode 11, Jon Irabagon, always moving forward. It's a treat to play full tracks of music on this podcast, so a big thanks to Jon Irabagon for the music. Remember to keep your eyes and ears peeled for new releases over the coming year by Jon. And you can find this podcast on all the major streaming services, as well as my website. Share with your friends, colleagues, and family. I appreciate it. Jazz festivals are in overdrive, so check one out near you and support live jazz wherever you are. And if you're interested in sponsoring my podcast, please email me through my website. Johannes Wallman provides the theme music. It's from his composition McCoy from his album Precarious Towers. And remember to subscribe. You get all the juicy stuff automatically. Upcoming episodes, they include two of the noted emerging jazz talents, saxophonist Julieta Eugenio and pianist Mickey Yamanaka, and a major growing force, harpist Brandy Younger. Thank you for listening to Strictly Jazz Sounds. I'm Steve Browngen.